Hey, welcome back to Module 5, Lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to process and harness our emotions. In order to, both process and harness an emotion, we're going to be using the value framework. And the first step is going to be V for validate. And again, we're validating our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. And depending on where you're at when you're doing this, will influence how long you spend in each one of these steps. That's the beautiful thing about the value framework, is that you can use it in the moment, and you can also use it to do a deep dive later on. So when you're in the moment and you're trying to rein in an emotion, so let's say, like for me, this happens every day during a mealtime, one of my toddlers becomes upset and they throw their food. And with 9 children at home, a lot of food is getting on the floor, which means that it's a big hassle to clean up because one of our kids really loves fruit. And so when fruit hits the floor, it creates residue that doesn't sweep up. It creates a whole lot of extra work. And so I also think of it as a horse analogy. I'm trying to rein in the emotional reaction. My natural inclination is to become upset, to yell, I'm frustrated, and I want to release that emotion so that my child knows how much it upsets me so he stops doing it. That's my natural inclination. But I also recognize that those actions don't lead to the result I want. But in the moment, it's a lot of years of habitual thinking leading to habitual feeling and habitual releasing that emotion when I'm upset. So I'm having to learn how to rein in those actions and process the emotion versus react to it. So what do I mean by reining in the horse, reining in the emotion? I'm talking about taking a moment to pause. And then right now, oftentimes when we're in that angry, frustrated state, we're not in our prefrontal cortex. We're not in our lower brain. We're in the moment, we're upset, and we're not thinking clearly. What you wanna do is you wanna regulate your body. You wanna regulate back up to your prefrontal cortex. One of the ways that helps me do this is I pause. Some people like to take 10 deep breaths. I like to rub my fingertips together because a lot of times it kind of gives me a lot of physical sensation to focus on. It also allows me to clench them if I'm really trying to rein it in. And then you let that energy just move. You recognize what you're feeling and allow yourself that space to come out of your lower brain up into your prefrontal cortex and really think about, okay, I'm feeling angry. We're gonna name it. So that's the second step. First step is pause. Second step, we're gonna name the emotion. I am feeling angry. I'm feeling frustrated. I am feeling betrayed, whatever it may be. And then comes the second question. After I stated, I'm feeling angry, then I have to ask myself, does this energy serve me right now? So think about what the energy wants to do, how your body wants to use it. So with me and in the kitchen, all of my kids are around, and I know blowing up on my 3-year-old is not going to produce the result that I want. And what's the result I want? It's not that I want my kid to stop throwing food. Yes, I do. But the result I want right now is to show up as a father who's patient. That's the result I want. I want to show up as a father who's patient. And blowing up on my kid, because he is being a kid and that he's in the learning process, I know that anger does not serve me right now. This emotional energy, what it wants to motivate me to do, those actions will not create the results that I want. And so because it's no, I'm going to put some of that energy in short-term storage, because the likelihood of me being able to process all that energy all at once, probably not likely, all right? There's other things going on. And so I'm gonna say to myself, I'm feeling angry, take some deep breaths, 1 or 2, and then whatever residual emotion is still there that wasn't released through those breaths, I'm gonna put in short-term storage. We all have to have a little short-term storage for emotional energy because a lot of times we don't have time to process everything in the moment. So we have to give ourselves that permission to say, I'm still upset about this, and I'm gonna process this in the near future. We don't wanna put into long-term storage deep underground in that deep vault in the corner where we try to forget that it's there. Short-term storage. And then we want to anchor to our values. So we validated, we pause, we name it, we ask, does this serve me right now? And part of the naming it phase, we may ask ourselves, why am I feeling angry? Because sometimes in the moment, you might start feeling all this angst and you may not understand why you're feeling it. So asking yourself why, after you've named the feeling, after you've validated what it is, and you're asking, why am I feeling this way? Identify the thought, identify what it is that's causing this emotion. Then you look, will this serve me right now? And then if it's no, then you anchor, you understand what it is that you do want, and then you anchor to your values. I want to show up as a patient father, because that's growth to me. That's my faith in Jesus Christ. I think Jesus Christ would show up as patient, so I'm anchoring to that. I want to show up as a patient father. And then you reset, you evolve. What does it mean to act with faith? What does it mean to act with growth right now? So that's a quick and dirty value model right there, okay? So we validate, so we're pausing, we're reining in the emotional horse, naming what we're feeling, asking why we're feeling it, looking at what this emotional energy is wanting us to do, the result that might create, asking ourselves, is that the result that I want? No, anchor and reset. And if the answer is yes, sometimes, I think sometimes anger can serve us in very specific circumstances, but we have to be really careful with that energy, because so often when we're angry, we're not thinking clearly, we're not rational. And so even when we do want to use that anger to motivate us, to move us to right the wrongs in the world, we want to be very careful that we're doing it rationally and that we still show up as the person we want to. So a lot of times, every Sunday, my family goes to church, generally every Sunday, and trying to teach 9 children between the ages of 10 years to 8 months how to sit quietly and respectfully for 60 minutes. It's an exercise of patience. And in the middle of that 1-hour church, sitting on that bench, when I'm trying to help children, constantly redirecting them from throwing their shoes into the next pew or yelling or using outside voices, I do a lot of short-term energy storage, because there's all sorts of thoughts going through my head about trying to balance my thoughts about being embarrassed for what my children are doing, and balancing my thoughts with how I think my children should be acting versus understanding and accepting where they're at and being patient with that. There's a lot of thoughts, a lot of emotional energy just building up, and I have to do a little breaths and releases, but a lot of that kind of goes to short-term energy storage till after the meeting. I've gotten the kids everywhere, sit down and just let all of that go. Now, what about post-event? So we've addressed how would you validate an emotion and process it in the moment, and how you might even harness it in that specific case of anger. What about post-event? Because a lot of times we have a lot of events and circumstances in our lives that we have a lot of residual emotional energy towards. We have ruminating thoughts, and we just carry this around with us. So how do we use the value framework to process or harness emotional energy in this situation? And this really applies to our thinking about the breakthroughs that we want in our life. And so what often is the case is we have a lot of emotional baggage. It may be hurt from previous marital conflict, hurt from past engagement with our parents or our children. And we have these thoughts about these individuals that's causing this kind of continual emotional energy. It's very difficult to resolve. And so just sitting there and getting hard, and it weighs us down. So there's a lot of processing of past emotional events that we need to work through. But then we also have to think about how we want to act in the future, especially with self-defeating, self-destructive behaviors, when we know that what we're doing isn't good for us, but it also feels good in the moment. And so we're attached to that. I think one of the greatest examples is just food. Sometimes the way that we eat doesn't serve us. There's times where in the past where I've eaten things past the point where it's made me feel sick, especially with candy. And sometimes it's hard to let go of that. Or other behaviors, whether it's trying to stay on task at the house when all I really want to do is relax. There's a lot of times when I'm thinking about a future event, and I have to think about what emotion would I want to harness to give me the energy to do what I want to do, to give me the energy and motivation to show up how I want to, that's aligned with my values, but may not be how I'm currently doing it. And we can process energy from post events and look at how we harness the energy that we want, or harness the emotions that we want for when we face that again in the future, when we try to face that resolution of conflict in the future. So we're going to talk about how we do that next. Now, I want to talk about long-term versus short-term before we proceed to that. When you're imagining these storage vaults of emotion, I just really want you to visualize that they're almost like batteries, right? And batteries after time go bad. And so we don't want to allow emotional energy to just store in us for a really long time. That's what causes chronic stress. And it can cause mental, it can weigh our minds down, weigh ourselves down, or we just end up numbing ourselves to life's experiences if we allow that emotional energy to stay in that long-term storage for too long. So we want to keep it in short-term storage, just because in day-to-day life, sometimes we have to rein in the emotion instead of letting ourselves react to it and then process it appropriately or harness it appropriately in the future. And so how do we do that? So again, if we have the time, I recommend sitting down using a value framework worksheet or just a journal, a page in your journal. And what does it look like to validate? First off, you're going to name it. You're going to describe to yourself what this emotion feels like in your body. You're going to ask, its color, its size, its shape, its movement, location, because that energy resides in different places. We talk about how sometimes our muscles get tense from certain emotions, and we're able to relax and release that. Our whole body can relax, lowers our cortisol levels. And so sometimes really sitting down and visualizing, where do I feel shame? Where do I feel anxiety? Where do I feel guilt? Where do I feel anger? And you can tell the physical manifestation of that emotion in different parts of our body. And once we have identified it, we're just going to let it sit. We're going to focus in on it. We're going to visualize it. And I like to do a visual technique where as I breathe in, and I have this picture in my mind of my stress. It has a shape, it has a color, it has movement. And as I breathe in and out, I imagine air circulating around that emotion, breaking it up. As I exhale, I blow out pieces of that emotional structure. And after 10 breaths, it gets smaller and smaller. And I keep on doing that exercise, sometimes day after day, until I'm able to resolve and process all that emotional energy. And I've been able to harness a different thought, harness a different emotion to act and create a different result. So that's a good way to validate that emotion. Now, again, that emotion will keep on reoccurring unless we have identified the thought that it is its genesis. So that's why it's really critical that after we've validated, we've named the emotion, we've processed it somewhat, we have to ask why we're feeling. We have to really understand the thoughts causing the emotion. Because only then will we be able to change the way we think so that we can change how we feel. And so I like to use the acronym BAS. And BAS, the B stands for, again, biological bias, assumptions, superlatives, shoulds. So we want to identify the thoughts, as these are big time unintentional emotion drivers. Biological bias, avoiding pain, pursuing pleasure, conservation of energy, right? Those are a big three for causing unintentional emotional energy that we don't want in our lives. And second, assumptions. From what I've observed in my own life and from the lives of those closest with me, especially people who are going through any kind of faith transition, faith crisis, oftentimes it has to deal with assumptions that we believe to be true, or thoughts that are anchored to other beliefs that we believe to be true, and those assumptions are shaken. And no matter who it is that you have, whether you have heroes in sports, heroes you look up to, and it's very easy for us to develop these idealized images of who people are that we respect. And when that image is shaken and you realize, oh, they're a lot more complex, or they have a lot more faults than we believe, than what we initially assumed. This is especially true in new relationships. Once we're past the honeymoon phase and realize, oh gosh, you stink when you fart, or you have some habits, or like you never pick up, the trash, or you leave this or that. We start seeing our assumptions about people begin to be shaken, and we start realizing that they're a lot more complex, that they have a lot more faults than we previously assumed that they had. So it can cause us to question and doubt. And so we want to look at our assumptions, and if our assumptions aren't serving us, if they're untrue, and we need to recalibrate our thoughts, recalibrate our beliefs to better match the terrain. If our map is bad, then we need to recalibrate the map to the actual terrain. And so looking at the assumptions is a great way of doing that. Superlatives, this is the always and the never. And it seems like we are always using always and never when we're accusing someone of behavior, when we say they never validate us, you never say sorry, you never clean up. It's always very accusatory. And also we often use superlatives with ourselves, like, oh man, I never win, or I'm always failing, I'm always making mistakes. So those should be red flags for us. So whenever we're using superlatives in our thoughts, it's a red flag to let us know that, hey, these thoughts are giving us a lot of emotional energy that doesn't serve us, that we don't need. And then shoulds. I always talk about don't should yourself. And this often comes from belief statements. I should be clean. I should do this. And the thing is, with shoulds, it creates a lot of pressure to conform to one way, and it develops a very fixed mindset. My spouse should be doing this. Should? They could. And just because you believe they should doesn't mean that it's a subjective versus objective way of viewing the world. So replacing shoulds with coulds is, a lot of different authors and speakers and thinkers have talked about how just replacing a should thought with a could thought changes the emotional energy. It changes how you feel about a topic. So again, BAS, biological bias, assumptions, superlatives, shoulds. When we're asking why we're feeling something, check those out. So there's ask why. So when you have the time, you can do a deeper dive into how you're thinking and what thoughts are there. And then you want to look. And again, this is just what result have these actions been creating in your life, and what will they continue to create? We've covered look a lot in module 4, so I won't do a deep dive into it right here. And then you want to understand, what are these the results that you've been getting? Are they the ones that you want? Do they align with your values? And then you're going to evolve, explore different thoughts, especially if they're value-centric. And then you're going to want to practice these thoughts. Use affirmations, journal, and game plan when you go into this situation next. The thoughts you want to think, and imagine how you'll feel because of those thoughts and how you will act. So some key points about harnessing your emotions. I highly recommend using something like an emotions wheel to help you understand what you're feeling. A lot of times, we don't really talk a lot about different kinds of emotions and what they are. There are a lot of different named emotions. And it's a lot like a color palette. If all we ever see are the primary colors, and we only paint with those colors, it really simplifies and narrows the scope of our existence. Whereas if we're willing to expand our concept of emotions to what's out there, it's being able to use an expanded color palette. You'll be able to create much more in your life with those expanded options. Now, after this, I am going to be doing some bonus episodes of doing deep dives into emotions, what thoughts might lead to them, and what actions those emotions motivate. And the more we're able and willing to feel, the more opportunities in life, experiences we can unlock for ourselves. And the key is being willing to feel the emotions and to either use it to fuel our actions or to release it so that it doesn't stay in our bodies. Either process the emotion, we release it, or we harness it, use it. And that is how we're going to create the breakthroughs in our lives, because that's how we're going to stay motivated. We identify the thoughts that help us to feel motivated, committed, or whatever it is that we need to feel in order to act the way that we need to create the results in our lives. That's where the breakthroughs occur. The breakthroughs occur, the changes that we need in our lives, the permanent and lasting changes that we need in our lives occur when we are able to harness the energy of our emotions to act in a way that will create the results in our lives. And we do that first by understanding the causal link between our emotions and our thoughts. If we can change our thoughts, we can change our lives. I'm really excited to work on these concepts with you in our group coaching calls and our one-on-one coaching calls. And if you haven't purchased the full program, the next few modules are incredible. We're talking about decisions, how to make better decisions as a family, as a couple. We're talking about processes. So imagine all those difficult transitions throughout your day, whether that's getting up in the morning, getting ready for work, getting ready for school, coming home from work, getting home from school, going out, whatever it may be. A lot of times the processes in our lives are not very efficient, so we spend a lot of energy on them. And that's a lot of energy and a lot of emotional mental bandwidth that we're using on these broken processes versus creating the breakthroughs that we want, moving forward and achieving our goals. And then finally, we're going to look at measuring what matters to your family. And this all comes back to the idea of a family scorecard, measuring what matters most to your family. So you get to define, we've been in lessons, in modules 3, we identified all of these plans that you've made to actualize your values and vision in your life. And so we have to measure those things. And we're talking about how is that we can do a weekly meeting, a quick weekly meeting, so that we're consistently focusing on what matters most to us. So that keeps us moving forward and what the benefits are of that, so that you get traction in your family. So I'm really excited to share, if you haven't already, purchase the full family operating system. And if you're not in any of our coaching programs, I invite you to consider joining us. And so you can experience with a lot of others, all these great, fabulous changes. I'm really looking forward to meeting you. See you on the inside.